I can tell every 4.5 years I get a new crop.
Right.
Because the mamas won't let them see it until they're about 4.5 years old.
For years, audiences believed they knew why Gene Wilder disappeared from Hollywood. After the death of his beloved wife, many assumed he had simply lost his passion for acting, but the real reason remained hidden until after his death. Behind the unforgettable smile of Willy Wonka was a man quietly battling Alzheimer's disease, a diagnosis he chose to keep secret. Throughout his career, Gene Wilder brought joy to millions, even as his own life was marked by fear, heartbreak, and loss. His final act of kindness was protecting the magical memories his fans cherished most. Gene Wilder was born Jerome Silberman on June 11, 1933, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Long before he became one of Hollywood's most beloved actors, his childhood was shaped by a single event that changed everything. When Gene was just 8 years old, his mother developed severe rheumatic fever. During one visit, a doctor warned the frightened boy never to upset her because the stress could worsen her condition. Whether meant seriously or not, those words left a permanent mark. Gene grew up believing his mother's happiness depended on him. He became determined to make her laugh, inventing funny voices, songs, and impressions whenever she was in pain. Without realizing it, comedy became more than entertainment. It became an act of love. Despite his devotion, his childhood was far from easy. Time away at boarding school exposed him to bullying and emotional trauma that deepened his insecurities. Those painful experiences left him shy, sensitive, and constantly searching for acceptance. Years later, audiences would know Gene Wilder as a joyful comedian. Few realized that his remarkable ability to make people laugh had been born from a frightened child trying to comfort his sick mother. As Gene Wilder entered adulthood, acting became more than a dream, it became a refuge. He studied theater with remarkable dedication, eventually training at HB Studio in New York, where he worked tirelessly to develop his craft. Success, however, remained distant. Like countless aspiring actors, he balanced auditions with ordinary jobs simply to survive. Beneath his ambition lingered the emotional weight of childhood. His mother's illness had filled him with a deep sense of guilt, leaving him convinced that happiness was something he had not fully earned. During this period, he briefly explored spiritual movements that promised meaning and inner peace, searching for answers to feelings he struggled to explain. For a time, he also worked in a psychiatric hospital, assisting patients receiving treatments that exposed him to profound human suffering. The experience broadened his understanding of pain and vulnerability, qualities that would later give surprising depth to both his comedic and dramatic performances. In 1957, Gene's mother passed away. Her death devastated him, but it also ended the constant fear that had shaped his childhood. For the first time, he began to imagine a future not controlled by anxiety. Soon afterward, he married Mary Mercier, hoping to build a stable personal life while continuing to pursue acting. The marriage, however, gradually fell apart, as financial struggles and professional uncertainty placed increasing pressure on the relationship. Although success still seemed far away, Gene refused to abandon his dream. Every audition, every rejection, and every small stage performance strengthened his determination. Unknown to him, one unexpected meeting was about to transform his career forever and introduce Hollywood to one of its most unforgettable talents. By the early 1960s, Gene Wilder was still an unknown actor, chasing opportunities in New York. He had talent, determination, and years of training, but Hollywood had yet to notice him. Like many aspiring performers, he accepted small roles wherever he could find them, never knowing whether the next audition would change his life or leave him back where he started. Everything began to shift when he met the young writer and director Mel Brooks. Brooks was preparing an unusual comedy called The Producers, a film so unconventional that many believed it would never succeed. Yet Brooks immediately recognized something special in Wilder. Beneath his gentle appearance was an actor capable of explosive emotion, perfect comic timing, and complete unpredictability. When The Producers premiered in 1967, it surprised critics and audiences alike. Gene's unforgettable performance as the anxious accountant Leo Bloom earned him an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actor. Overnight, the struggling stage actor became one of Hollywood's brightest new talents. The success opened doors that had once seemed impossible. Directors discovered that Wilder possessed a rare gift. He could move effortlessly between innocence and chaos, making audiences laugh while revealing genuine vulnerability beneath every performance. His expressive eyes, nervous energy, and heartfelt sincerity made him unlike any other comedian of his generation. His partnership with Mel Brooks continued to flourish. Together they created classics such as Blazing Saddles and Young Frankenstein, films that remain among the greatest comedies ever made. Although Brooks was known for outrageous humor, Wilder often insisted that the funniest moments came from treating absurd situations as completely serious. That philosophy became the foundation of his unique style. Behind the growing fame, however, Gene remained remarkably humble. He had experienced too many disappointments to take success for granted. The frightened boy who once worried about making his mother smile had become one of America's most admired actors, yet he never lost the sensitivity that defined him. Just as his career reached extraordinary heights, another opportunity appeared, one that would introduce Gene Wilder to millions of children around the world and create a character whose mystery would endure for generations. That role was Willy Wonka, and no one could have imagined how deeply Gene himself would shape the legend. By the early 1970s, Gene Wilder had already earned the respect of Hollywood, but he was still searching for a role that would define his career. That opportunity arrived in 1971, when he was offered the lead in Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. While the film was based on Roald Dahl's beloved novel, Wilder believed the mysterious chocolatier needed something no script could fully describe. Before agreeing to accept the role, Wilder made one unusual request. He wanted Willy Wonka's first appearance to begin with the character walking slowly with a cane, looking weak and frail. Then, without warning, Wonka would stumble forward into a graceful somersault before standing up with a smile. The filmmakers agreed. Wilder later explained that from that moment on, the audience would never know whether Wonka was telling the truth or playing another clever trick. That single idea became one of the most memorable entrances in movie history. Wilder also helped shape Wonka's appearance. He suggested changes to the costume, refining everything from the famous top hat to the velvet coat. More importantly, he gave the character a personality unlike any children's movie hero audiences had seen before. Wonka was warm, mysterious, playful, and slightly unsettling all at once. His gentle smile could instantly become impossible to read, leaving both the children in the story and the audience constantly guessing. Although the film received mixed reviews upon its original release and performed only modestly at the box office, it slowly found new life through television broadcasts and home video. Year after year, new generations discovered Gene Wilder's unforgettable performance. For millions of children, he became the only Willy Wonka they could imagine. Ironically, the role that made him immortal wasn't built on loud comedy or elaborate special effects. It was built on subtle expressions, quiet confidence, and an air of mystery that only Gene Wilder could create. Without realizing it, he had created a character that would outlive him, becoming one of the most beloved figures in cinematic history. Yet, while audiences saw a man at the peak of his career, his personal life remained far more complicated. Success could fill theaters, but it could not guarantee happiness. Away from the cameras, Gene Wilder was still searching for something he had struggled to find since childhood, a lasting sense of love and peace. For all the joy Gene Wilder brought to audiences, finding lasting happiness in his personal life proved far more difficult. Behind every successful film was a man who longed for the one thing fame could never guarantee: a loving family and someone to share his life with. His first marriage, to Mary Mercier, began with hope but slowly unraveled. Both were young, and Gene was still struggling to establish himself as an actor. Financial uncertainty, long periods apart, and the pressures of an unpredictable career gradually pushed them in different directions. By the mid-1960s, the marriage had ended, leaving Gene disappointed but determined to move forward. Not long after his career began to take off, he married Joan Schutz, a woman with a young daughter named Catherine. Gene embraced the role of stepfather with genuine affection, especially after Catherine began calling him Dad. Friends later recalled that he took the responsibility seriously and wanted to provide the stable family life he himself had often wished for. But even this marriage struggled under the weight of Hollywood. Long filming schedules kept Gene away from home, while rumors surrounding his growing fame created tension between the couple. During the production of Young Frankenstein, speculation about his relationships with co-stars placed enormous strain on the marriage. Although many details remained private, the trust between them slowly disappeared, and the marriage eventually ended in divorce. The repeated failures left Gene questioning whether he was simply unlucky in love. Each relationship seemed to begin with optimism, only to end in disappointment. Yet despite the heartbreak, he never became bitter. Those who knew him described him as remarkably gentle, polite, and hopeful, believing that somewhere the right person still existed. That hope was rewarded in the early 1980s when Gene accepted a role in the comedy Hanky Panky. On set, he met comedian and actress Gilda Radner, whose warmth, humor, and infectious energy immediately caught his attention. Their connection was unlike anything either had experienced before. They understood each other's comedy, shared the same gentle spirit, and laughed together with an ease that felt effortless. For the first time in years, Gene seemed genuinely happy. Friends noticed the change almost immediately. The quiet actor who had endured failed marriages and years of emotional disappointment suddenly looked younger, lighter, and full of optimism again. In 1984, Gene and Gilda married in the south of France, surrounded by close friends and family. They dreamed of building a peaceful life together and hoped to have children. After years of searching, Gene finally believed he had found the love that would last a lifetime. Neither of them could have imagined that an even greater tragedy was already beginning to unfold, one that would test Gene Wilder more than any challenge he had faced before, and leave an emotional wound that would never completely heal. For a brief moment, it seemed that Gene Wilder had finally found the happiness that had eluded him for most of his life. His marriage to Gilda Radner was built on genuine friendship, shared humor, and deep affection rather than the pressures that had strained his previous relationships. Together, they laughed constantly, supported one another's careers, and dreamed about building a family. Friends described them as inseparable. Whether they were working on films, attending events, or simply spending time at home, there was an unmistakable warmth between them. Unlike the glamorous image often associated with Hollywood couples, Gene and Gilda preferred a quieter life. They found joy in simple moments, believing that love mattered far more than fame. One of their greatest hopes was to have children, but as they tried to start a family, heartbreaking setbacks began to appear. Gilda experienced several miscarriages, each one leaving the couple emotionally devastated. They searched for answers, believing that perhaps time or medical treatment would eventually solve the problem. Instead, the situation became increasingly frightening. Gilda began suffering from unusual fatigue, severe pain, and unexplained health problems. Doctors initially struggled to identify the cause. Some believed the symptoms were related to stress, while others suggested less serious conditions. Months passed without clear answers, and Gene watched helplessly as the woman he loved grew weaker. Finally, the devastating diagnosis arrived. Gilda had advanced ovarian cancer. For Gene, the news felt painfully familiar. As a child, he had spent years watching his mother battle chronic illness, believing that making her smile could somehow ease her suffering. Now, decades later, he found himself standing beside another woman he loved, once again unable to stop the disease that threatened to take her away. Despite the terrible diagnosis, Gene refused to surrender hope. He devoted himself completely to Gilda's care, accompanying her to treatments, encouraging her during difficult days, and doing everything possible to lift her spirits. Even as one of Hollywood's most recognizable actors, he quietly stepped away from much of his career to remain by her side. Together, they faced surgeries, chemotherapy, and endless hospital visits. There were moments when it seemed the treatments might be working. Friends and family held on to cautious optimism, believing Gilda's remarkable sense of humor and determination might carry her through the illness. But the cancer continued to spread. Through it all, Gilda remained astonishingly brave. Rather than allowing the disease to define her, she spoke openly about the importance of cancer awareness and early diagnosis. Her honesty encouraged countless women to seek medical attention and better understand symptoms that were often overlooked. Gene admired her courage every single day. Behind closed doors, however, the emotional toll became overwhelming. Watching someone he loved suffer brought back memories he had spent decades trying to escape. Once again, he found himself confronting the same helplessness that had haunted his childhood. No amount of love, optimism, or determination could change the reality unfolding before him. On May 20th, 1989, Gilda Radner passed away at just 42 years old. Gene's world collapsed. The woman who had restored his faith in love was gone. Those close to him later recalled that he was inconsolable. He wandered through their home in disbelief, unable to accept that the vibrant, joyful person who had filled every room with laughter had suddenly disappeared. He reportedly found himself talking to the walls, struggling to understand how life could change so completely in a single moment. Professionally, the loss affected him just as deeply. The spark that audiences had always seen on screen became difficult to find. Although he continued acting for a few more years, Gene later admitted that life without Gilda was unimaginably different. The grief never truly left him, yet even in the midst of overwhelming sorrow, Gene chose to transform his pain into something meaningful. Determined that other families should not endure the same tragedy, he became a passionate advocate for ovarian cancer awareness. Alongside Gilda's friends and supporters, he helped raise public understanding of the disease and encouraged improvements in research and early detection. His efforts eventually contributed to the creation and growth of organizations dedicated to supporting women affected by ovarian cancer. It was one of the quietest yet most important chapters of his life, not performed before cameras, but carried out with the same compassion that had always defined him. The loss of Gilda changed Gene Wilder forever. Although he would eventually find companionship again, a part of him seemed to disappear with her. Hollywood still saw a beloved comedy legend, but behind the gentle smile was a man who had endured another heartbreaking chapter in a lifetime already marked by loss. The greatest performances of his career were behind him. Soon, Gene Wilder would make a surprising decision that left many fans wondering why one of Hollywood's brightest stars had chosen to walk away from the spotlight while he still could. After the devastating loss of Gilda Radner, Gene Wilder returned to work, but something had changed. The energy and excitement that had once driven his career no longer seemed as important. For years, acting had been his passion, but now it often reminded him of the happiness he had lost. The applause still came, the scripts still arrived, yet the joy that had once accompanied them had quietly faded. In 1991, Gene married Karen Boyer, a speech consultant and hearing specialist whom he had met while filming See No Evil, Hear No Evil. Unlike the fast-paced world of Hollywood, Karen offered Gene something he had long been searching for: peace. Their relationship was built on trust, companionship, and mutual respect, rather than the pressures of celebrity. Friends later described their marriage as calm and deeply loving. With Karen by his side, Gene gradually began to rethink his priorities. Hollywood continued to see him as one of its most gifted comedic actors, and producers believed he still had many memorable performances ahead of him. Offers continued to arrive from major studios, each promising another successful chapter in his remarkable career. But Gene surprised everyone. Instead of accepting these opportunities, he quietly began turning them down. Among the films he reportedly declined were Mrs. Doubtfire, Stuart Little, and Big Daddy, movies that became enormous box office successes. To many people, refusing such roles seemed impossible to understand. Most actors spend their entire careers chasing opportunities like these. Gene simply wasn't interested. It wasn't because he disliked acting. It wasn't because audiences had stopped loving him. He had reached a point where success no longer meant appearing in another hit film. After years of personal tragedy and professional achievement, he valued ordinary life more than celebrity. The constant travel, endless interviews, and relentless pace of filmmaking no longer appealed to him. "I like show," Gene once explained, "but I don't like the business." That simple sentence captured everything he felt about Hollywood. He had always loved performing. He loved creating memorable characters, making audiences laugh, and losing himself inside a story. What he never truly embraced was the machinery surrounding fame, the publicity, the pressure, and the endless pursuit of commercial success. Rather than chasing another blockbuster, Gene chose a quieter existence. He began writing novels, discovering that storytelling offered a different kind of creative satisfaction. Without cameras or film crews, he could create characters entirely through imagination. Several of his novels reflected his gentle sense of humor and his lifelong appreciation for mystery and romance. Painting also became one of his favorite pastimes. It allowed him to express emotions that were often difficult to describe in words. Unlike acting, there were no critics, opening weekends, or award ceremonies. There was only the quiet pleasure of creating something personal. Although he rarely appeared in films, Gene did occasionally return to television. In 2003, he made a guest appearance on the sitcom Will and Grace. His performance earned him a Primetime Emmy Award, reminding audiences that his remarkable talent had never disappeared. Still, he resisted every suggestion of a full comeback. Fans frequently wondered why Gene Wilder seemed to have vanished from public life. Rumors circulated that he was simply tired of Hollywood or preferred retirement after decades of hard work. Others assumed he wanted to spend more time writing. Those explanations were only partly true. The real reason was known only to a small circle of family and close friends. As the years passed, Gene became increasingly protective of his private life. Public appearances grew rare. Interviews became less frequent. He preferred spending time with Karen, reading, writing, listening to music, and enjoying the quiet routines that fame had once made impossible. To outsiders, it appeared that Gene Wilder had simply retired to enjoy a peaceful life after an extraordinary career. But behind the scenes, another challenge had already begun. It was a battle unlike anything he had faced before, unlike the struggles that had shaped his childhood, or the heartbreak that followed Gilda's death. This new enemy could not be overcome through determination, optimism, or love. Slowly, almost invisibly, it began taking away the very memories that had defined his remarkable life. And Gene Wilder made one final decision, one that would remain hidden from the world until after he was gone. For years, Gene Wilder's fans wondered why one of Hollywood's most beloved actors had disappeared from public life. They assumed he had simply grown tired of the entertainment industry, or preferred the quiet life he had built with Karen Boyer. Few questioned his absence. After all, Gene had always valued privacy more than publicity. But behind the peaceful retirement was a heartbreaking reality. In his later years, Gene Wilder was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, a progressive neurological condition that slowly destroys memory and cognitive function. The diagnosis came as a devastating blow, not only to Gene but also to the small circle of family and friends who suddenly found themselves carrying an enormous secret. Unlike many public figures who choose to announce serious illnesses, Gene made a different decision. He chose silence. It wasn't because he was ashamed. It wasn't because he wanted sympathy. According to those closest to him, Gene's greatest concern wasn't himself. It was the millions of people, especially children, whose lives had been touched by his portrayal of Willy Wonka. He feared that if young fans learned their magical Wonka was suffering from Alzheimer's, the image they treasured would forever be replaced with sadness. It was one final performance, not for fame, not for applause, but for the happiness of complete strangers. As the illness gradually progressed, everyday moments became increasingly difficult. Gene occasionally struggled to remember names, conversations, and events that had once seemed unforgettable. Family members quietly adjusted their lives around his condition, helping him maintain as much independence as possible while protecting his privacy. Visitors often noticed only small changes. Sometimes he searched for familiar words. Sometimes he paused longer than usual during conversations. Sometimes memories seemed just beyond reach, yet his kindness never disappeared. Friends continued to describe him as gentle, thoughtful, and remarkably gracious. Even as memories faded, the warmth that had defined Gene Wilder throughout his life remained. One story revealed just how quietly Alzheimer's was changing him. At a gathering with friends, Gene found himself unable to remember the title of one of his most celebrated films, Young Frankenstein. Rather than becoming frustrated, he smiled and acted out scenes from the movie until others recognized what he meant. The moment was bittersweet, a reminder that even someone whose performances had become part of cinematic history could slowly lose access to his own memories. For Karen Boyer, watching the disease progress was heartbreaking. She stood beside Gene with the same devotion he had once shown Gilda Radner during her illness. Day after day, she became both wife and caregiver, protecting him from unnecessary attention while preserving the peaceful life they had built together. The family remained united in their decision to keep Jean's diagnosis private. They understood that once the news became public, reporters would inevitably follow every development. Headlines would shift from celebrating his extraordinary career to documenting his illness. That was exactly what Jean wanted to avoid. He had spent decades bringing joy to audiences around the world. He wanted that joy to be the lasting memory. On August 29, 2016, Gene Wilder passed away at his home in Stamford, Connecticut, at the age of 83. His death was caused by complications related to Alzheimer's disease. Only after he was gone did his family publicly reveal the illness he had quietly battled for years. The announcement shocked millions. Many people had no idea he had been sick at all. Karen later explained why the family had remained silent. Gene understood how much Willy Wonka meant to children across generations. He simply couldn't bear the thought that learning about his illness would replace their happy memories with fear or sadness. It was an act of remarkable generosity. Even while losing pieces of his own memory, Gene chose to protect the memories others held of him. His final days reflected the quiet dignity that had always defined his character. According to his family, one of Gene's favorite songs was Ella Fitzgerald's beautiful recording of Somewhere Over the Rainbow. As he rested peacefully during his final hours, the song began playing in his room. Those closest to him later recalled that he smiled gently as the familiar melody filled the room. Shortly afterward, Gene Wilder passed away peacefully with Karen by his side. The world had lost one of its greatest comedians, but it had also lost something much rarer, a man whose compassion extended far beyond the screen. In the end, Gene Wilder's final secret wasn't simply that he had Alzheimer's. It was that, even as the disease slowly erased parts of his own life, he remained determined to protect the happiness his work had given to millions of others. That final decision revealed more about Gene Wilder's character than any performance ever could. Yet, even after his death, his story was far from over. The characters he created, the laughter he inspired, and the quiet kindness that defined his life would ensure that Gene Wilder's legacy would endure for generations to come. When Gene Wilder passed away in August 2016, the world didn't simply lose another Hollywood actor. It lost a performer whose work had become woven into the childhoods of millions of people across generations. His films had made audiences laugh, cry, and wonder, but perhaps his greatest achievement was something far less visible. He reminded people that kindness and vulnerability could exist alongside brilliance and humor. Unlike many celebrities whose fame faded with time, Gene's performances only grew more beloved after his retirement. Every year, families continued introducing their children to Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. New audiences discovered Young Frankenstein, Blazing Saddles, The Producers, Silver Streak, and Stir Crazy. Each generation found something different in his performances, yet they all recognized the same qualities: sincerity, intelligence, and heart. Gene never relied on exaggerated jokes or loud performances to make people laugh. Instead, he mastered something much more difficult. He allowed audiences to believe every emotion his characters experienced. Whether he was playing an anxious accountant, an eccentric scientist, or the mysterious owner of a magical chocolate factory, his performances always felt genuine. That authenticity became his signature. Perhaps nowhere was this more evident than in his portrayal of Willy Wonka. Decades after the film's release, countless actors have played unforgettable fictional characters, but very few have become inseparable from the role itself. Gene Wilder's Wonka wasn't simply entertaining, he was impossible to predict. One moment he appeared warm and welcoming, the next mysterious and unsettling. Children never knew exactly what he was thinking, and adults appreciated the subtle complexity beneath the colorful costume. Ironically, the film that struggled commercially upon its original release eventually became one of the most cherished family movies ever made. Television broadcasts introduced it to millions who had never seen it in theaters, transforming Gene's performance into an enduring cultural icon. His collaborations with Richard Pryor created another lasting legacy. Although the two men had very different personalities off camera, their chemistry on screen was extraordinary. Together, they helped redefine comedy during the 1970s and 1980s, proving that two completely different performers could create something unforgettable simply by trusting each other's instincts. Films like Silver Streak, Stir Crazy, and See No Evil, Hear No Evil remain celebrated for their energy, timing, and unforgettable comic exchanges. Gene also left an important legacy beyond entertainment. After Gilda Radner's death, he became deeply committed to raising awareness about ovarian cancer. Rather than allowing grief to consume him completely, he used his public voice to encourage research, education, and earlier diagnosis. His advocacy helped draw attention to a disease that was often misunderstood, ensuring that Gilda's memory would inspire hope rather than despair. Those who worked with Gene often spoke less about his talent than about his character. Directors admired his professionalism, fellow actors remembered his generosity, crew members recalled his politeness. Unlike many major stars, Gene never developed a reputation for arrogance or difficult behavior. He treated everyone, from producers to assistants, with the same quiet respect. In an industry often associated with oversized egos, his humility stood out. Perhaps that humility explains why Gene chose to disappear from public life without fanfare. He never organized a farewell tour. He never tried to remain constantly in the spotlight. Instead, he stepped away when he felt his story on screen had reached its natural conclusion. Then came his final act of kindness. By keeping his Alzheimer's diagnosis private, Gene ensured that children would continue seeing Willy Wonka exactly as they always had, full of mystery, imagination, and magic. He refused to let illness become the defining chapter of his public life. Instead, he allowed the world to remember the characters who had brought so much happiness to so many people. In many ways, that decision perfectly reflected the man Gene Wilder had always been. As a frightened child, he tried to make his sick mother smile. As an actor, he spent decades making strangers laugh. As a husband, he devoted himself to caring for Gilda Radner during her battle with cancer. And in his final years, even while facing Alzheimer's disease, he chose to protect the joyful memories that audiences carried of him. Throughout his life, Gene experienced fear, rejection, heartbreak, and unimaginable loss. Yet those hardships never made him cynical. Instead, they deepened his compassion and shaped the gentle humanity visible in every performance. Perhaps that is why his work continues to endure. People don't simply remember Gene Wilder because he was funny. They remember him because he made extraordinary characters feel deeply human. His laughter never sounded forced. His tears never felt artificial. His smiles always carried sincerity. Long after the cameras stopped rolling, Gene Wilder continued giving audiences the same gift he had first offered his mother as a frightened little boy, a reason to smile, even during life's darkest moments. That may be his greatest legacy of all.